The front door clicked open, but the sound barely registered. She was too caught up in the moment, the heat of the kiss, the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of knowing she was doing something forbidden. The hands on her body weren't her husband's, but for months that fact hadn't seemed to matter. Then she looked up, and her world collapsed. Her husband stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. No anger, no shock, just a quiet, heavy stillness that sent ice through her veins. Her breath caught in her throat. Time slowed, stretching unbearably between them. Every ounce of excitement that had been coursing through her just seconds ago drained from her body, leaving only a hollow, sickening fear in its place. Her lover moved first, pulling back slightly, adjusting his shirt as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. A casual smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Well," he said, his voice too light, too comfortable. "Guess the secret's out." She wanted to slap him. Instead, she forced herself to stand, her legs unsteady, her heart hammering painfully in her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her husband just watched. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't breaking things. He wasn't even looking at the other man. His eyes were locked onto hers, cold and distant, as if he were seeing a stranger. She swallowed hard. "I can..." His head tilted slightly, cutting her off without saying a word. He blinked once, slowly, then, finally, he spoke. "I was wondering when I'd catch you." Her stomach twisted violently. The casual tone of his voice made her feel worse than if he had screamed. She had imagined every possible reaction, rage, betrayal, even heartbreak, but not this. Not acceptance. "You knew," she whispered, her throat dry. A small, humorless smile flickered across his lips. "Of course I knew." Her chest tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to be shocked, caught off guard. She was supposed to have a chance to explain, to come up with some kind of excuse, to control the situation like she always had. But she had already lost control. Her lover chuckled, crossing his arms. So, what now? She turned toward him, a flare of anger rising in her chest. Was he really this careless? Did he not see what was happening? Her husband finally moved, reaching into his pocket. For a moment she thought he was going to throw something, demand answers, make a scene. Instead, he pulled out his keys. Without another word, he turned, stepping out the door and into the night. She took a shaky step forward. Wait. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Her breath hitched as she waited for the explosion, the shouting, the rage, the accusations. Any second now, her husband would lash out, demand answers, maybe even throw something. But he didn't. Instead, he laughed, a low, humorless chuckle that sent a cold wave of fear crashing over her. It wasn't the reaction she had prepared for. She had expected anger, not amusement. She felt her throat tighten. I can explain." He tilted his head slightly, still standing in the doorway. "Explain what?" His voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. "That you're cheating on me?" He shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets. "No need." I already knew. Her heart dropped. Her lover, still lounging on the bed, his shirt wrinkled, his confidence unshaken, chuckled softly. "Well," he mused, "guess the secret's out." She turned to him, a sudden wave of irritation rising in her chest. Did he not understand what was happening? He sounded entertained, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. She snapped back to her husband, desperate to regain control of the situation. But he held up a hand, silencing her. "I was wondering when I'd catch you," he continued, shaking his head. "You weren't exactly subtle." Her stomach twisted. He had known. For how long? How much had he seen? Had he been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come? Panic clawed at her throat. It wasn't. Don't. He cut her off again, his voice still unsettlingly even. I don't want to hear it. She flinched. Her lover, still completely at ease, smirked. Well, this is awkward. She shot him a glare. How could he be so indifferent? Did he even care that this was destroying her life? Her husband sighed and glanced toward the door, as if he had somewhere else to be. That was when the real fear set in. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about what happened next. She expected anger, because anger meant he still cared. But this indifference, it meant he was already done. Her pulse raced. Please, let's just talk. There's nothing to talk about, he interrupted, his tone light, almost amused. You made your choice. He pulled his car keys from his pocket, his fingers spinning them absently. He wasn't rushing. He had already decided. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out. She stood there frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her husband didn't look at her with rage, betrayal, or even heartbreak. Instead, there was something worse, indifference. He exhaled, slow and measured, before stepping fully into the room. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, like a man who had already made up his mind. He didn't look at the other man lounging on the bed. He didn't look at the rumpled sheets or the discarded clothes on the floor. He only looked at her. How long? His voice was calm, steady, almost clinical, like he was going through a checklist of facts rather than confronting his wife's betrayal. She opened her mouth, but no words came. There was no use lying. There was no excuse that could erase what had just happened. He nodded slowly, as if he already expected her silence. That's what I thought. Her chest tightened. He raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't. The single word sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just a command. It was a wall, a barrier between them that she had built, brick by brick, with every lie, every late-night excuse, every moment she had chosen someone else over him. She took a shaky step forward, reaching for his arm. Please? He stepped back before she could touch him. Don't, he repeated, this time firmer. The rejection stung more than if he had yelled. Her affair partner let out a small, amused chuckle from behind her. Well, this is uncomfortable. She spun toward him, eyes flashing with sudden fury. Did he not understand what was happening? Did he think this was a joke? Her husband let out a short breath, but it wasn't quite a laugh, more like disbelief. He turned his gaze toward the other man for the first time, studying him with a look of complete disinterest. Then, back to her. This is what you threw us away for? He asked simply. Her throat went dry. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. He let the words settle between them before shaking his head slightly, not in anger, not in disappointment, just exhaustion. And then he turned and walked toward the door. She panicked. Where are you going? His hand hovered over the doorknob as he turned back, his face unreadable. Does it matter? Tears burned in her eyes. I still love you. A flicker of something, pain, regret, or maybe just finality, crossed his expression. Yeah? He tilted his head. You have a funny way of showing it. And with that, he was gone. She stood motionless, her pulse hammering in her ears. The sound of the door clicking shut was deafening, final. Her husband had left. No shouting, no threats, no desperate attempt to hold on. He had just walked away. The weight of that reality crashed over her, crushing her chest with a force she hadn't anticipated. She had expected an explosion, something that proved he still cared. But instead, he had looked at her like she was a stranger, like she was nothing. Her hands trembled as she turned toward the man still lounging on the bed, completely at ease. He stretched lazily, running a hand through his hair, completely unaffected by what had just happened. She swallowed hard. "That's it?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. He glanced up, amusement flickering in his eyes. "What did you think would happen?" Her stomach twisted. She had been waiting for a storm. Instead, she had been met with silence. Her affair partner shrugged, reaching for his shirt. "Honestly, I thought your husband would punch me." He chuckled. "Guess he's got more self-control than most." A sick feeling crept up her spine. The way he spoke, so casual, so indifferent, made her feel small, foolish, like she was just another woman who had made a bad decision, like she was a story he would laugh about later. She hugged herself, suddenly feeling cold. "This isn't funny," he smirked. "You weren't saying that last night." Her breath caught, shame burning her from the inside out. The affair had been thrilling, intoxicating, a rush she had convinced herself she needed. But now it felt empty. Now it felt like the worst mistake she had ever made. Her lover stood, buttoning his shirt without urgency. "Well, this was fun while it lasted." She blinked, the words hitting her like ice. "What do you mean?" He gave her a look, one that made it painfully clear how little this had ever meant to him. "I mean, your husband knows now. That kind of kills the excitement, don't you think?" She felt her chest tighten. "So, that's it? You're just walking away?" He raised an eyebrow. "I never promised you anything." The words cut deeper than she expected, because he was right. She had thrown away her marriage for what? A man who was already moving on before she had even begun to process what she had done. Her breath came out uneven as she turned away from him, gripping the edge of the dresser to steady herself. Had she really destroyed everything for nothing? The sound of rustling fabric behind her made her turn back. He was slipping on his jacket, already halfway to the door. She stared at him, her mind spinning. "Did you ever care?" He paused, considering her for a moment. Then, with a smirk that made her stomach turn, he said, "You were fun." And just like that, he walked out too. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the sheets, as if holding on to something solid would stop the sinking feeling in her chest. The room, which had felt thrilling and full of energy just moments ago, now felt suffocating, empty. Her affair partner stood near the window, casually scrolling through his phone. No tension in his posture, no guilt in his expression, just indifference. She swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do." He didn't even look up. "About what?" She blinked at him, stunned by how unaffected he was. "About this. About what just happened." Finally, he sighed, locking his phone and shoving it into his pocket. "I mean, your husband walked in, saw us, and left. Pretty smooth exit, honestly." He smirked. "So, yeah, I'd say it's over." Her stomach twisted. "Just like that?" He gave her a lazy shrug. "What did you expect?" She stared at him, heart hammering. This man had just been in her arms. He had been whispering sweet words to her just hours ago. Had any of it been real? She shifted, hugging herself. "I thought—" The words trailed off, and she hated how small her voice sounded. His smirk faded slightly, but his amusement never fully disappeared. "You thought what?" She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I thought you cared." For the first time, he hesitated. His head tilted slightly, as if considering her words. Then he let out a quiet chuckle and shook his head. "You were fun." Her breath hitched. That was it. The pit in her stomach deepened, threatening to pull her under. She had destroyed her marriage, thrown away years of trust, for this, for someone who wouldn't even pretend to care. He glanced toward the door. Look, I should probably go. No offence, but I don't really do the whole emotional fallout thing. She let out a shaky breath. So that's it? He grabbed his jacket from the chair, slipping it on with ease. You're single now, right? Should be easier for you. Her throat tightened. Single. It wasn't just a word, it was a consequence. Her husband was gone. And now, the man she had risked everything for was leaving too. He checked his phone again, barely paying attention as he stepped toward the door. Take care of yourself, yeah? Her fingers curled into fists as she watched him go. No apology, no guilt, not even a second glance. The door clicked shut behind him. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. She sat in her car, staring at her phone, her fingers hovering over his contact. The last call had gone straight to voicemail. So had the one before that. She knew the next one would too, but she still hit dial. Her chest tightened as the ringing started. 1, 2, 3 times, then voicemail. His voice came through calm, distant, recorded long before tonight. Leave a message. The beep sounded, but she said nothing. What could she even say? I'm sorry? It didn't mean anything? Nothing she said would undo what he had seen. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone, setting it on the seat beside her. The streetlights cast long shadows on the dashboard. She hadn't even realized how long she'd been sitting here. Time blurred when everything felt like it was falling apart. With a deep breath, she forced herself to start the car and drive home. Home. She had no idea if it was still that anymore. The house was dark when she arrived. A heavy silence filled the space as she stepped inside, flipping on the hallway light. The soft glow illuminated the entryway, the living room. Something felt off. Her gaze landed on the small table by the door. His keys weren't there, neither were his shoes. Her stomach clenched. She moved toward the bedroom, each step slow, hesitant. The door was open, the closet light spilling out into the room. And that's when she saw it. His side of the closet was empty. She let out a shaky breath, stepping forward like she could somehow change what she was seeing. The shelves, once filled with his folded clothes, were bare. The hangers swung slightly, the only proof that something had been there at all. Her throat tightened as she turned, her eyes darting to the nightstand. The framed wedding photo that had sat there for years was gone. Panic rose in her chest. She rushed to the dresser, pulling open drawers. Empty. The bathroom, his toothbrush, his cologne, his razor, gone. A cold wave of dread settled over her. She turned toward the kitchen, her mind racing. Maybe he was just staying somewhere else for the night. Maybe he needed space. Maybe. Then she saw it. A single white envelope sat on the counter, his handwriting on the front. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, unfolding the paper inside. Don't contact me. My lawyer will be in touch. Her breath hitched. Her legs felt weak. She clutched the edge of the counter, her fingers pressing into the cool surface, grounding herself against the weight of reality. The thrill of the affair had been temporary. The damage she caused, permanent. She sat on the couch, staring at the phone screen, his name still saved under My Love. Her fingers hovered over the call button, her heart pounding with indecision. Would he even answer? Would he listen? Or had she already lost the right to speak to him? The empty house around her felt suffocating. The silence was louder than any argument they had ever had. She had thought the worst moment would be when he caught her, when she saw the pain in his eyes. But no, this was worse. He was gone, not just physically, but emotionally. Her chest ached as she set the phone down, burying her face in her hands. She had destroyed everything. The man who had once held her through the hardest moments of her life, who had loved her without conditions, who had planned a future with her, was done with her. And for what? A thrill, attention, a selfish need to feel desired by someone else. It wasn't worth it, not even close. Her gaze drifted to the envelope on the table, his handwriting clear and sharp. "Don't contact me. My lawyer will be in touch." The finality of it sent another wave of nausea rolling through her. Was this it? Was this really how their story ended? She thought back to the years they had spent together, the laughter, the late-night talks, the quiet moments that didn't need words. She had taken all of that for granted, thinking she could have more, that she could chase something else while keeping what she already had. But she had been wrong. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. She had no right to cry. He was the one who had been betrayed. Her phone buzzed in her lap, making her heart jump. She grabbed it, hope flashing through her chest. But when she looked at the screen, it wasn't him, her affair partner. A single message, "You okay?" Her stomach turned. She nearly laughed at the irony. The man she had risked everything for was the last person she wanted to hear from now. Without hesitation, she deleted the message, then she blocked his number. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start. Her fingers hovered over her husband's name again. She could call him, beg, tell him she would do whatever it took to fix this, go to therapy, cut off every person that had enabled her choices. But would he even believe her? Would she, if she were him? Her hand trembled as she set the phone down again. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she had a choice anymore. She had spent months pushing him away, and now she might have finally succeeded.